The first sound was not a bark, nor a growl, but something softer, wet, strained, half-swallowed, a whine rising in the air like breath off a dying fire. It drifted through the trees just as the church bell marked midnight, and the man on the edge of the woods paused where his boots sank into frost-bitten mud. He didn't move, only listened. From the far side of the hollow, behind the line of birch and the half-rotted fence post that once marked someone's idea of a property line, the dog was crying again. The man Edgar had lived in these parts long enough to know when an animal's cry was hunger and when it was something else. He didn't speak of it to the others in town, not at the post office where the old-timers gathered around black coffee and still older jokes, not even to Marla at the hardware store, who had taken to asking, quietly, how he was getting along since Helen passed. Instead, each night at 11:50, Edgar walked the same dirt path that used to be a logging trail, to a place where the woods began to fold into themselves like an old memory. He didn't know why, only that something about the sound unsettled him. It wasn't just that the dog cried, it was how it cried, as if it were remembering something no animal should. Tonight the wind came from the east, curling low through the trees. Dry leaves whispered around Edgar's ankles. The moon was thin, veiled in cloud, casting more suggestion than light. He didn't bring a flashlight. Somehow it felt wrong to expose this place to anything that bright. He crouched by the same patch of fern where he'd stood each night for the past 9. The hollow dipped below him, dark and silent at first. Then, from the far side, a rustle. Not loud, a cautious shifting, like something trying not to be heard. And then it came. The dog's cry. It was deeper tonight, and somehow more distant, as if muffled by earth. A single note, stretched too long, cracking halfway through. Edgar's chest tightened, not from fear, not quite, but from something slower and heavier, like regret or memory. He had never seen the dog, only heard it. Each time he tried to move closer, the crying stopped. Once, on the third night, he called out softly, coaxing, but was met with nothing but silence and the creaking of branches overhead. No prints in the mud, no broken twigs, no proof. Just the sound, and his own unease. But tonight felt different. He didn't move. He waited. The wind shifted again, colder this time. A crow called once sharply, then went silent. The dog whimpered a second time, then went quiet too abruptly, unnaturally, as if silenced mid-breath. Edgar leaned forward, heart tapping behind his ribs. Then footsteps, not the quick, erratic scuttle of an animal, but something measured, deliberate, too slow to be deer, too heavy to be fox. One step, then two, then nothing. He turned his head slightly, ears straining, eyes adjusting to the dark. For a long moment, there was only stillness. Then a sound behind him, not far off, a stick cracking under weight. Edgar stood. Slowly, the cold pressed into his palms as he brushed against the tree. He wasn't sure why, but he didn't call out this time. Something about the moment felt. Watched. Then, through the mist near the edge of the hollow, he saw it, the dog, but it wasn't what he expected. No matted fur or snarling teeth, no wild, mangy frame. This dog was still, perfectly still. Not standing, not sitting, just waiting. It was large, perhaps a shepherd mix, its coat thick and pale under the moon's dim veil, its head tilted, not in curiosity, but in something closer to grief. And it did not look at Edgar. It looked past him, as if seeing someone who wasn't there. The silence that followed was complete, the kind that hums in your bones and makes your heartbeat feel like thunder. Edgar blinked once, but the dog did not vanish. It only stayed in moving, unblinking, until a breeze passed through the trees and lifted the ferns around his feet like the breath of something gone. And when Edgar looked again, the dog was gone, not vanished with a rustle, not turned and trotted off, simply no longer there, as though it had never come at all. He stood for a long while after, not ready to leave, not ready to follow. The woods around him felt different now, not menacing, not even mysterious, but full of some quiet truth just beyond his reach. Far above, the clouds parted. The moon lit the hollow like a forgotten photograph, grainy and gray, and from the shadows below the old birch fence, a child's toy, a small, sun-bleached stuffed bear, lay, half buried in the moss. Edgar had never seen it before. He did not pick it up. He only turned toward home, the sound of the midnight bell echoing faintly across the valley behind him. And somewhere out there, in the cold and the dark, the dog began to cry again. Edgar stood still for a long time, the cold seeping up through the soles of his boots, as if the earth beneath him had forgotten how to hold warmth. The wind had died, but its absence made the woods feel heavier, like something unsaid hanging in the air. The faint cry of the dog still echoed somewhere in the dark behind him, quieter now, as if it were mourning not just loss, but memory itself. He turned toward home, but he didn't move. His eyes had found the small stuffed bear lying in the moss beneath the birch fence, a cheap toy sun-bleached to a colorless rag, its single plastic eye glinting faintly in the moonlight. It hadn't been there before. Of that, he was sure. He had walked this path every night. He knew every broken branch, every sagging weed. The bear had not been part of the woods until now. He took one step toward it, then stopped. Something old inside him recoiled, not from fear, exactly, but from the weight of something beginning to stir. A quiet dread, not about the dog, about what the dog might be pointing toward. By the time Edgar reached his cabin, the wind had returned in thin sighs across the windows. He lit the small stove, warmed his hands against the cast iron, and did not sleep. Instead, he sat in the chair by the front window, the same one Helen used to favor, watching the trees shift under moonlight and trying not to remember the way her hands trembled in the last months, the way she'd stared through this very glass, as if already halfway gone. When morning came, it was slow and colorless, the sky a sheet of dull pewter. He dressed without speaking and walked back to the hollow. In daylight, it looked thinner, less haunted, just woods, stripped of their mystery by the bleached truth of morning, but the bear was still there. He knelt, careful not to disturb the moss, and studied it. A child's toy, yes, but older, the stitching frayed, one arm chewed or torn. It smelled faintly of mildew and dirt, but beneath that, something else, something familiar, smoke maybe, or the faint trace of wood polish. Something domestic. He picked it up and felt it. Not a shock, not a vision, just a sensation behind his ribs, something old and sharp, like the edge of a name you've forgotten but still carry. He stood, toy in hand, and looked toward the woods where the dog had stood. There was no sign of it, not a paw print, not a path through the grass. He didn't return to town that day. He walked instead, down trails he hadn't followed in years, past the old red barn half swallowed by bramble, the foundation of a cabin long burned out. These woods held stories, most of them half told. People left things here, lost them, buried them, let them rot into the soil. He had done the same. Years ago, near dusk at the edge of the river, Edgar stopped and looked across the water. The current was low now, revealing patches of stone and driftwood. He remembered a moment, vague and distant, standing here with someone small beside him, a girl, maybe 6, holding his hand, laughing, a different kind of memory. A dream, almost. Helen had wanted children. He hadn't spoken of that in a long time. The bear felt heavier in his pocket. When he returned to the cabin, the sky was bruised with coming night. He lit the porch lantern but left the door open, just slightly. The silence of the woods pressed against it. No birds, no wind, just stillness. Then at exactly midnight the dog cried again. This time, Edgar didn't wait. He took the bear in hand and stepped back onto the path, his flashlight still unlit in his coat pocket. His breath steamed in the cold. The sound led him back, through the hollow, past the birch fence, deeper than before. The cry stopped once, then resumed, closer, and then, there it was again. The dog, standing beside a decaying stump in the clearing, exactly where moonlight framed the ground like a stage. Its eyes were dark, unreadable, not threatening but aware. It did not move toward him, only looked. At the bear, Edgar stepped forward, then crouched. He didn't speak. He simply placed the toy on the cold earth between them and waited. The dog moved not toward the bear, but around it, circling once, slow and precise. Then it sat, still watching him. Its body shivered slightly, though the air was calm. And then, from the woods beyond, a new sound stirred. A second cry, smaller, thinner, high-pitched. Edgar turned toward the sound, but saw nothing. When he looked back, the dog was standing again, still facing him, but its ears were pricked now, body alert as if listening for something beyond even his hearing. The bear lay untouched between them. Then, without warning, the dog turned and slipped into the woods, silent as a shadow, and Edgar, tired, unsure, but no longer willing to retreat, stepped over the toy and followed. Would you like to continue to the next part of the story? A raw wind slipped between the trees, brushing Edgar's shoulders like fingers that didn't want to let go. He stood at the edge of the hollow, back to the moonlit dip where the child's toy still lay in the moss, untouched. The bear's head tilted sideways in the dirt, one ear half torn, its stuffing clinging to a damp root. Edgar didn't look back again. His boots found the path by memory, not sight. The trees seemed narrower now, closer. He walked slower than usual, unsure why. Each step felt like it might disturb something that wasn't ready to be disturbed. When he reached his porch, he paused. The cabin's silhouette sat against the woods like a half-finished thought. One light still burned inside. He always left it on, not out of fear, but habit. The kind of habit born from years of coming home to someone, then years of coming home to no one, and needing the light to make that difference less obvious. He stepped inside, shut the door behind him, and leaned against it longer than he meant to. The warmth from the stove had begun to fade. He didn't add more wood. Instead, he sat by the window, staring at the edge of the trees, watching, waiting not for the dog, but for the feeling the dog left behind. Outside, the wind died. The stillness was sudden, total. Then came the sound, not a cry this time. A low, dragging scrape like something being pulled across frozen leaves, not far off, not deep in the woods. Right outside. Edgar stood without meaning to. He didn't grab the flashlight. He didn't put on his coat, just opened the door again, quietly, and stepped back into the cold. Nothing moved, but the bear was no longer where he'd seen it, not in the moss, not in the dirt. Gone. His eyes scanned the edge of the hollow, then shifted left, there just past the broken fence. The toy now sat propped against the base of a tree, as if it had been placed there, not dropped, not carried by wind or animal. Place. Edgar single quotes Ed's chest tightened not with fear, but with memory, the kind that comes not with clarity, but with weight. He stepped forward once, twice, then he heard it. A sound too human to belong in the forest, but too distant to be real. A voice, not words, but the high, short cadence of a child calling to something, then silence again, heavy and absolute. Edgar froze. He hadn't heard a child's voice in these woods for over a year, and suddenly, it came back, the memory he'd buried under chores and routines and the dull rhythm of grief. Not his own child, but the neighbor's girl, May, 5 years old, bright as spring, with knees always scraped and hair that never stayed braided. She used to run through the woods behind their properties, laughing, calling out to things she swore she saw: foxes, deer, fairies, even ghosts. One evening, just before the first frost, she vanished. The search went on for weeks. Edgar had helped, of course. Everyone had, but the woods had offered nothing. No tracks, no torn fabric, no signs of struggle or shelter, just silence, and one neighbor, May's father, who never spoke again after the third day until tonight. Edgar had told himself the dog's cries were just that, a stray, injured maybe, lonely, maybe someone else's loss, wandering through his woods. But now the sound had changed, and with it, so had the silence. He approached the toy. He bent down, picked it up. It was damp, cold, and older than he remembered, but it was the same bear May had carried. He knew that now, not by its face, but by the red thread on its side, a patch Helen had sewn for her one afternoon when May had visited and insisted her bear needed surgery. He hadn't seen that bear since. The dog's cry broke the stillness again, but now, it came from behind him. Edgar turned. There, 10 paces away, the dog stood once more, still as before, but this time, closer, no longer staring past him now. It looked at him directly, and in its eyes, Edgar saw not fear, not pleading, but something strange at recognition. The wind picked up again, dry leaves scattering across the clearing. The dog did not move, and Edgar, without fully knowing why, sat down slowly on the cold earth. The bear still clutched in his hand. The dog took one step forward, then another, and from the trees behind it, just before the branches swallowed the moon again, something else moved, a flicker. Too small to be a deer, too tall to be a fox, but unmistakably human, and very, very still. Would you like to continue to the next part of the story? The dog began to cry again, but not like before. The sound no longer rose from the belly of the woods, no longer drifted up through trees like the mournful echo of something already lost. This time it came from the path itself, closer to close. Edgar stopped walking. The toe of his boot had just tapped the frost-trimmed edge of his front step. His hand hovered near the door handle, but he did not turn it. He listened. It was the same dog, the same voice, broken, hollow, filled with something deeper than pain. But the sound was sharper now, less like mourning, more like pleading. Behind him, the night had stilled. No wind through the needles, no restless rustle in the brush. Even the creak that wound through the trees seemed to hush. Edgar turned slowly, one hand at his coat collar. He squinted into the dark, searching for movement along the trail. Nothing, but he could feel it. That uncanny sense of being observed, some presence just out of sight. The kind you don't hear, but know. He stepped down from the porch. The sound stopped. Not faded, stopped as if swallowed for a moment. Everything stood still. Edgar's breath made small clouds in the air. The distant church bell had long since fallen silent. Only the faint creak of a frozen branch above reminded him. Time still moved. Then, a new sound, a shuffle of movement from near the tree line. Something soft, like paws against leaves. Then a sharper sound, brittle bone or stone striking against something hollow. He didn't call out, not this time. Words felt inadequate. Here, even dangerous. He simply moved toward the sound, slower now, aware of every twig beneath his boots. At the base of the old birch, the one where the dog had once stood so still he saw it. Not the dog, but something left behind, a shallow depression in the ground, not dug, exactly, worn, flattened by repeated presence in the center. Fur, tufts of pale shedding coat caught in the brambles nearby. Something worse, a collar, torn, frayed at one end, crusted with dirt and time. Tag still clung to the ring, just legible by moonlight. Leela, he crouched slowly. The ground smelled of earth and faint rot, but also something else, something metallic, sour. His fingers touched the tag, then drew back. Not from fear, from memory. He remembered now. Not everything, but a piece. There had been a girl, some years ago, 5, 6, maybe more. Summer then, he'd heard about it only in fragments. A child who'd gone missing, vanished during a family hike while her parents fought over something small. A toy left behind. A search that lasted 3 days before thinning out into rumor and silence. Leela. Edgar closed his eyes. His throat tightened. He hadn't thought of that story in years. Most hadn't. In towns like theirs, time softened the edges of tragedy. People stopped speaking the names of children they could not save. He stood, slowly, and turned toward the house but then paused again. There were tracks now, faint but fresh. Too large for a fox, too round for a deer. They curved around the base of the birch and disappeared into the Tresnot toward the hollow. But further west, into a part of the woods people didn't often go. He hesitated. It was late. His body ached. He hadn't eaten since noon. But something not inside him pulled him forward. Not guilt. Exactly. Something gentler. Like duty. He followed. The path narrowed quickly, the trees pressing in, making him feel younger and smaller than he was. Bark brushed his shoulders. Roots tripped his boots. Still, he pressed on. The forest changed subtly here. Less pine, more ash and alder, the smell of damp moss and something else, soot maybe, fire long dead. Then he saw it, a clearing. Unexpected, and in its center a small cabin, barely more than a shed. Weather-worn and silent, its roof half-collapsed under the weight of years. Edgar didn't know it was there. No one had mentioned it. No road led to it, and at its door, the dog Dotted stood with its head lowered, tail still watching the door, not trying to enter, not running, just waiting, Don. As Edgar stepped into the clearing, the dog turned, not startled, not afraid, and looked straight at him. There was no sound, no growl, no cry, just eyes wide, amber, filled with something startlingly human. Recognition. Then the door behind the dog creaked open just slightly. No wind moved, no one appeared, only the door ajar, revealing nothing but shadow and something inside, breathing. Would you like to continue to the next part of the story? The door stood open by less than a hand's width. No wind moved it. No voice called out. Yet from inside, Edgar could hear it, the breathing. Shallow, rhythmic, alive. The dog did not bark, did not move. It simply stood sentinel beside the frame. Head turned halfway between the shadow inside and the man outside, as if bridging some quiet truth between them. Edgar took a step closer. The frost underfoot cracked softly, like old glass beneath a curtain of moss. His breath, ragged and quiet, trailed behind him. He reached the threshold and placed a hand on the door. The wood was damp, brittle, edged with time. He pushed inside. Dust and the scent of long decayed paper. A cot, slumped with age. A stove, rusted shut. And in the far corner, almost hidden behind a curtain of hanging cloth, something moved. Not something. Someone, a figure, sat curled against the wall. Legs pulled to chest. Arms wrapped tightly. Small, still a child. The girl's head tilted slowly toward him, her face pale in the gloom, hair tangled like it had grown through seasons. Her eyes met his, not with fear, but with something older. A knowing too heavy for her frame. She did not speak, but Edgar understood. Not the whole of it, how she survived, why no one found her, how time could bend around one's soul while the world forgot, but enough. The truth didn't need words. Behind him, the dog exhaled. She moved and just slightly unpressed a hand to the floor. The dog padded in and laid beside her with practiced familiarity, its flank brushing her foot, as if to say, "You can rest now." Edgar watched as her fingers slipped into the dog's coat. No command, no instruction, just return. Don't. In that moment it was clear. The cries, the waiting, the long nights beneath the hollow moon. The dog had never been lost. It had been searching, or maybe guarding. The wind returned, brushing the treetops. Outside, a slow murmur through the branches. The world resumed its turning. Edgar crouched slowly near the doorframe, his knees aching, boots damp. He didn't ask her to come. He didn't need to. The girl leaned forward, shifting onto her knees. The dog stood, waited for her, then walked beside her step for step as she crossed the room. She paused at the threshold, blinking at the moonlight, the open woods, the night she hadn't walked in for how long. She looked up at Edgar, her expression unreadable, not joy, not sadness, something quieter, trust. He offered his hand, and she didn't take it, but she didn't need to. She followed him out. They walked slowly, no rush, the dog at her side, its head low, body relaxed, its duty done, not in triumph, but in completion. Edgar said nothing. His throat was too tight. The forest no longer felt ominous, just old, vast, patient. By the time they reached the edge of the trail, the sky had begun to pale. A thin line of silver rimmed the horizon. Dawn was still far off, but it had begun to whisper its arrival. He paused by the birch tree, where the girl leaned to rest. The dog circled once, then lay at her feet, eyes half closed. Edgar looked down at the collar still clutched in his pocket. The tag cold against his skin. Lila. He had no family to call, no officials to alert, not yet. That would come later. For now there was only this. He sank to the ground beside them. The three of them, man, girl, dog, sat in silence as the light slowly bled across the frost-dusted ferns. No words passed between them, no plans. Only breath, shared presence, a moment held in stillness. And when the sun finally broke above the trees, casting soft gold across the hollow, Edgar looked at the dog one last time. Its eyes were closed, its body utterly still. The girl didn't cry. She only reached down, gently, and rested a hand on its back. The wind lifted, rustling the leaves in a slow, reverent hush. And where the dog had lain, the frost began to melt. Edgar watched as a single paw print remained, pressed deep into the earth. Not a mark of departure, but a memory. A promise kept. He did not try to explain it. Some things in nature don't need to be believed to be true.